Why was Chicago blushing at the party?
Why was Chicago blushing at the party?
Yeah. No? No takers? Because it's Chi-Town.
You guys like that?
That was a good one. Okay.
That was a good one.
I can say these jokes because Arslan, my boss, is not here. Anyways, okay, so I first off want to say thank you to everyone here. I know it's been a very long day. It's been a very impactful day, at least I hope everyone thinks so. I promise there's food at the end of the session, so it's worth it, not to mention these amazing panelists that are up in the front. I also want to say that on your chairs at the beginning of the convening, there were these little pamphlets or little cards. If you want to learn more about Enmyon or share it with your friends and family, the website's also on here. If you don't have one, there's some on the back as well. So let's keep the momentum going. Session 4, the intersection of foreign policy, domestic affairs, and national security with our civil liberties. So this is definitely a timely session for all of us. I will introduce everyone here on the panel, except for Salam, because we did that in the beginning, but yeah. It's all good.
I need no introduction.
So I'm going to go ahead and start out with Weil, right over here. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Engage. He is a seasoned diplomat who previously served with a distinction at the U.S. Department of State for a decade. Everyone go ahead and him and Salam will be moderating this panel. So our panelists themselves is Abraham Shayash. And then Maha Gennady, sorry. Abraham is serving his 3rd term in the Michigan House of Representatives and is currently the House Majority Leader. He is the first Muslim in this post and is the highest ranking Muslim legislator in the country. Amazing. Maha is the founder and executive director of Islamic Networks Group. She is the Arthur N. Training Handbook on Outreach for American Muslims, as well as training seminars for public institutions on developing culture. Oh my God. See, this is the end of the day that I cannot say. Cultural competency. Yes, with the American Muslim community. Everyone, go ahead and welcome the session.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, first of all, can everybody give a hand to Lita for doing a great job? Organizing us, leading us, telling us when to go outside. No, yeah, you're good. You're good at that. So, I want to start with a question. First of all, we're going to try to wrap this up by 6:15 so we can have dinner. So this will be the abridged version. Sorry about that, but it is what it is. But we're going to start with a question. Maybe you know about the Korematsu case versus the United States? Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Japanese internment.
Okay. And it was Fred Korematsu. After internment, he sued that this was a violation of his civil liberties. And what was the court decision?
That it was okay because it was a war emergency.
So what was the reason that the United States government gave for to the court? Anybody know? This is a key term. There you go. Thank you. Yes. He's been around me too long. So the license for the government to do things like that is national security. What did they say after 9/11 in terms of all the powers that they needed and all the surveillance? What was it? National security. So is national security exactly? So is national security a foreign policy or a domestic policy?
Foreign policy.
Foreign?
Yeah.
No, both.
Both.
It's both.
Who says foreign? Who says domestic? Who says both? Thank you. That is why we're having this panel. Because it is both. And when we separate foreign from domestic, we lose. We don't understand we don't really understand the problem. And for the Japanese American internment, that was one country, right? It was a foreign country. They accused of all these Japanese American citizens of espionage, and there was never a proven case. In this case, you have 55 plus Muslim countries, and they're accusing Muslims of sympathizing, joining, aiding, and abetting terrorism. And again, there's no case of that whatsoever. So it's a complex issue, but we have to address national security. I want to start with Wael Azad, because he just attended a national security meeting at the White House with the top U.S. officials there on issues related to U.S. national security abroad, and he's going to give us a report on that, and basically lead us towards how it's affecting us here in America.
Thanks, Salam. Salam alaikum, everybody. Who here knows the National Security Council? It's a body that reports to the president, and that's made up of very smart, very patriotic Americans who basically coordinate our government's positions on foreign policy issues, national security, and makes recommendations. None of them are elected or Senate confirmable.
That's right.
And they have tremendous power. Who knows the name of the President's Middle East coordinator? Brett McGurk. Brett McGurk is a former colleague of mine. He's the most significant, consequential person on U.S. Middle East policy. And nobody knows his name. Doesn't run for office. The position is an assistant to the president, not Senate confirmable. Is one of the most powerful positions in the world on Middle East policy. And so there are avenues for our community to shape, to influence policies on issues that impact us here. As Salam mentioned, when there is a group like ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and it produces mass migration and fear of terrorism, that produces Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, and a Muslim ban, it absolutely impacted us, right? Yes. So in the meeting with Brett, it's the person we met with, we're really trying to grapple with U.S. strategic interests as well as our agenda for human rights and good governance in that part of the world, which impacts us. And all too often, those discussions are, there's tensions between those priorities. And our conclusion, at least at Engage, and my conclusion as a former diplomat, is we just need more people who are values aligned in those positions. And we can have a discussion about what it takes to get in there. But really what we want to learn from you, Ibrahim, but also Maha, you have your thoughts on that. You live in the Bay Area, you're at the intersection of education and engaging with both government and our community, is how do we navigate those foreign policy issues that impact us here when you're just a state official or a local official? There are various issues we can get into, but just in a general way, I just have a question for you, Ibrahim, is as a state government official, what kind of foreign policy issues do you see that you would otherwise not think would impact somebody like you, or would you be asked to weigh in on it, or have a way of reacting to it?
Good question, and thank you for having me. I think when you think about my area of the state, which is Detroit, it's one of the only places that is north of Canada. There's a fun fact about the great city of Detroit, but beyond that, we are at a border that deals with so many issues as it relates to all the traffic that comes in and out of the tunnel and the bridge. And then subsequently, the conversation is always around migration. It's about dealing with refugees and the impact of Canadian immigration policy as it relates to the U.S. policy. It is inextricably linked in a place like Detroit because of how much movement happens. But as you think about the broader Muslim community as a whole, we tend to view the lens of foreign policy through a strictly moral framework, right? Is the United States causing harm? Are people being oppressed? Is the U.S. aiding and abetting certain things or not? And that binary is not healthy, because when you begin to sort of peel the onion and you get to get a deeper understanding of how foreign policy works, and I'm certainly not a foreign policy expert. I walked in as an international relations major at Michigan State, and I walked out farthest thing from it. So for me, I think the question that we have to ask ourselves, on the state level is you see the conversations around China and trade.
Mhm.
You know, how is that going to impact supply chain issues for state government? How is it going to impact work visas? And how the state can develop policies to then support and uplift a lot of the migrants that are coming in to the United States, whether it's high-skilled wage folks or those that are working the jobs that not many people want. So all those conversations are directly linked to foreign policy, and I think what you saw happen in the last 2 years, everyone's upset about Ukraine. It's like, well, why is the U.S. giving so much aid to Ukraine? Why are gas prices so high? What the hell does, excuse my language, what the heck does a war in Europe have to do with us here with our foreign, with our domestic supply of goods and services? And you begin to sort of understand that you can't separate state government from foreign policy, because whatever the United States on a federal level decides to do absolutely impacts the disinformation that comes in our way during our elections, and they target state governments, right, as a testing ground to figure out what they can use federally, trying to understand national security as it relates to state issues. You know, I think it was Virginia a couple of years ago that had one of the pipelines hacked, right? That was a foreign entity that ended up doing that hack, and that caused a huge issue for the state. So you see this affect you in so many ways, and I came in politics saying I don't care about foreign government, I don't care about foreign affairs. It's best to stay out. I want to fix the roads. I want to make sure that people are not drinking out of lead service lines and they're breathing clean air. But then you all of a sudden realize that you can't ignore what happens beyond the borders of the U.S., because it ultimately comes back all the way down to the local government level.
Thank you. And then, Maha, I think you can answer the same question, but as a person who's an expert now in training law enforcement, you do a lot of work on behalf of Islamic networks to train law enforcement. What do you see as opportunities for us in terms of engaging them on the issues such as the intersection of national security and civil liberties?
So I think it's really important for people to understand the context of my work. I am an educator, and what we do is we teach about Islam in the context of religious pluralism, and we counter bigotry or counter Islamophobia in the context of other forms of bigotry. That is what I do day in and day out, and I've been doing it for 30 years. And there is absolutely no way that you can avoid talking about politics or talking about foreign policy, especially as it relates to the Muslim American community, because they're directly interrelated. And so one of the things that we do, and probably one of the most important trainings that we do, is on Islamophobia and the impact of both American foreign policy and domestic policy on the quality of life of Muslims in the form of Islamophobia. So we do quite a bit of that training. More recently, we started, and this is something that the two AGs recommended as well. More recently, we started doing it in the context of other forms of bigotry, where we actually go out with African Americans, Latinx and Hispanics and Asians, and look at the interdependencies of these bigotry, relating it to white supremacy without calling it white supremacy, because most of the people that we talk to are white folks, and we're very careful about how we bring these issues up. There's a lot of sensitivity, especially in law enforcement, around these issues, and we try to look at the history that goes all the way back to colonialism, the creation of whiteness, how this system was reinforced through media, through public education primarily, through other policies in, by the government and in society, the impact that it has, the manifestations on each of these communities, and then how to work together to counter it. And law enforcement has been incredibly receptive to the way that we provide that training, unlike some of the training that might be provided by some of the progressive groups, which tends to blame white people for for bigotry and for the racism that exists in this society. And we would try to sort of explain to the public, law enforcement and other institutions that we work with, is to say that racism is an American problem, that we've all been conditioned to view each other in particular ways. So an Arab white Arab can be just as racist, honestly, as a white American, as an African American. I can share with you my experiences after 9/11, being a human relations commissioner for about 8 years, and the way that African Americans and Hispanics and Latinos interacted with me as a Muslim American. I thought that they would be the last people to discriminate, against Muslim Americans. I remember going to the mosque and saying, "We are alone. We don't have any friends out there." I thought we did, other people of color, but we don't. And so it's really important to sort of contextualize, racism, the experiences that we have in America, and to say that this is an American issue that all of us have to work together on to be able to counter it together. So the bulk of our work, I think, with law enforcement is not just countering Islamophobia, but it's also cultural competency and other related issues with police.
Back to what you go to the website for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and you look up terrorist groups. Every single terrorist group that's listed there is Muslim. There's no Hindu militant. There's no Israeli militants. There's no European neo-Nazis. All Muslim.
Like random cultish Japanese group or something?
No. I mean, there might be some weird group that they'll put on there.
Right.
1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20. So, what does that tell you as a policy person? What does that tell you?
I mean, we have a legacy problem that goes well beyond and before 9/11, and it's rooted in Orientalism that has shaped the way we look at that part of the world and the Muslim faith, and the both Republican and Democratic foreign policy establishments suffer from it to different degrees. Some is more overt than others. And the answer to it is education, representation, right? And engagement. If they don't know us, they're not gonna care about us. And what's better than that is that we are in there caring about us. When I say we, I mean values aligned individuals. We get hung up on somebody looking like us. Are they values aligned? Right? I don't need a Syrian Sunni Muslim to represent me. Bashar al-Assad is Syrian. He doesn't represent me.
Saddam Hussein was Muslim.
Saddam Hussein was a Tikriti Muslim, right? He doesn't represent me. Neither does anybody who has fascist tendencies. And we need to think of being in partnership and supporting values-aligned individuals for important positions that have policy impact. And I do want you to ask Abe on what's going on right now in terms of the threat to all of our efforts at coalition building with values-aligned Americans against white supremacy, fascism at the state level that is happening right now. And these are difficult choices for us as civic leaders, political organizations, elected. I think all too often we are looked upon as our job is just to serve Muslims. And that's not what we're here for. We're here to serve all Americans, irrespective of our backgrounds and beliefs, and we have to represent them fairly, just like we want to be represented by non-Muslims, right? And all too often I've seen our own community come to somebody like, I don't want to speak for you, but a Muslim representative and say, well, you're a Muslim, why aren't you doing X, Y, Z? A probably better question is, these are the values we thought you supported: human rights, affordable housing, clean environment. Why are you doing this or not doing it? And so I would love to learn about what you're seeing in terms of, I guess I took the question from you, is what are you seeing at the state level right now in terms of these conversations, these demands and pulls on you, in terms of our community wanting its rights protected, perhaps how do we reconcile that with also with the common good and with a common denominator that brings us together then, rather than like tears us apart?
Right.
That's it. It's like
That's
30
all.
seconds.
And you only have 5 minutes.
All right. Leave politics. That's the short answer. You know, it's tough because when you are an elected Muslim, and I was only the 3rd Muslim elected in state legislative office. There was an expectation that whether you like it or not, whether you want it to be the case or not, both people within your own community and folks outside of the community want to, and this we've heard this cliche plenty of times, there's an expectation that you are representative of something greater. And I think that's true. When you are a minority of elected officials that, you know, we've had over 5,000 state representatives in Michigan's history. We've only had 4 that are Muslim, known Muslims. And it's difficult because you want to be able to bring pride and joy to your community. I'm driven by my faith to serve, but oftentimes I think folks are extremely difficult on you when they don't understand the level of difficulty, the decision you making that you are put in sometimes. And I remember I was talking to one of my mentors who's an imam, and he said to me, Ibrahim, the best way to think about your votes was as you press the red and green buttons on the House floor. Imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took you in that moment and you are now answering to the Creator. Can you justify the vote you just took? And that was a heavy...
And no pressure.
I mean, that was a heavy statement, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
As you think about the finality of someone's life, one vote to be able to answer, I mean, that's a heavy thing to think about, but I have never forgotten that idea as I do the work that I do. But there's also reality that, you know, I represent the 2nd blackest district in the entire state. 3 out of every 4 voters in my district are African American. Is there a significant Muslim community in my district? Yes. Do they make or break elections? No. And they think they do, right? Which I think is healthy, that folks feel a sense of engagement and they feel a sense of power. But the reality is and this is not a byproduct of just Muslims, I think it's the United States culturally in general, we tend to have short-lived memories, right? We don't remember. I mean, I talk to Muslims right now who do not remember the ugliness of the travel ban. I talk to Muslims that don't remember what it was like to grow up during the era of 9/11. And we're now in the era where the advent of information and the siloing of what you see is tailor-made for your opinion, that it just gets uglier and uglier and uglier and uglier. And we're a deeply disconnected society, and I think the Muslim community, by and large, is no different. I think the elephant in the room is the tension with where we stand on LGBT rights and how we align with coalitions that folks may deem to be morally questionable in terms of our faith and our faith practices. And it's a delicate balance, right? But I think that we have to approach it with a sense of hikmah that I think, have forgotten, right? We are now byproducts of this quick attacking on Twitter and Facebook and immediately making assumptions on people. You know, we don't have a husn dhan. And I say, you hold your politicians accountable, but where is that husn dhan for the Muslim that is a politician? And nobody knows how difficult it is sometimes.
What does husn dhan mean?
You know, just benefit of the doubt, right? Just understanding that maybe this person had to make a difficult decision, but they automatically assume. I'll give you a quick example. You know, I'm proud of this vote, right? We amended, so Michigan, for the first time since Ronald Reagan, so 7 U.S. presidents, the Republicans have had one branch of government under their control. For the first time since Reagan, we took a Democratic trifecta. And I have the 2nd most Democratic district in the state. 92% of my district is blue. So we got 8% of Democrats. And when we took the majority, you know, we moved quickly on several issues. Among them was amending our state civil rights law, our anti-discrimination law, to add protections for LGBTQ folks. And as soon as the vote happened, I'm the majority floor leader, so I have to actually go through the motions. So there's a record of my name moving the bill and giving it immediate effect and so on and so forth. There's a woman from the Moms for Liberty movement who found folks from my community and fed them information and said he is going to make imams forcing them to wed same-sex couples, and that transgender women can enter the women's musalla and all these masajid. So there's outcry. Then they made a graphic and said the LGBT community thanks Representative Ayash specifically and these are people from my community. I want to make this clear. We thank him for advancing this issue, even though it wasn't my bill. People took to my Wikipedia page and edited my political position only on LGBT issues. Everything else was dismissed. And anyone that knows the work that I do, I focus on EJ and CJ, environmental and criminal justice. So this became a very vicious cycle. I didn't get it. Siri just echoed how I felt in that moment. I didn't get the level of intensity that all of this led to, and then it became a lot of assumptions were made. You know, similarly how the right says Democrats are bought and sold by Soros and things of that nature. You know, folks were saying, you know, he's funded by the Rainbow Coalition and so on. And I said, I wish they were able to support my campaign, because you got to raise a lot of money when you're in leadership. So, you know, there's accusations made that I got this deal from the governor, I got this from the LGBT community,
that's why you got
and so
in
on
the first
and so
place,
forth.
probably.
So I'm like, guys, like, we also have to be honest. Part of living in a free society, and I do not regret that vote, to be very clear. Part of living in a free society is we have to reconcile that there are things and there are people and there are places and spaces that we may not morally align with, no matter what spectrum of faith or politics or worldview you may have. But part of living in a free society is we have to reconcile that in order for us to have our faith, in order for us to have our individual liberties, we must not fight to take away those rights of other people. Now, the conversation around parental rights, I think that's a fair discussion to some degree. And I don't want to minimize the fear that a lot of Muslim families have right now around what are kids being exposed to. But the real question for me is, in what world do you expect to live in a country that grants us so many opportunities and so many freedoms, and you only decide that the freedoms that you have are significant, but the freedoms that others are deserving of the same as you? We're not asking for more rights. We're not asking them to get extra appreciation or extra accommodation. We're simply saying equalize the balance of power and the protections under the law for these communities. And we cannot simply jump to that assumption that, oh my God, we must now fight against these people because this is a moral battle for ourselves.
However, it all depends on what the actual vote was and what rights you were voting on, right? So I think that Muslim concern around these issues are valid. I completely agree with you, but it depends on whether you're talking about civil rights or some other rights that happen. But what I wanted to say, was that I do think that it's important to recognize the fact that we don't provide enough support to Muslim staffers, people in public office. We just assume that when these individuals are elected, that they are know-it-all, that they know everything, that they know what our issues are, that they're religious, and that they're going to decide based on Islamic values and all of that. I just made a phone call recently to Al-Hibri to have this conversation with Farhan to say that we really need to provide more support to Muslim staffers for them to understand some of the issues that are of concern to us so that they're able to support us. And there's nothing wrong with that because the Jewish community leverages the Jewish individuals that are in office, right? That are in these commissions and so forth. There's nothing wrong with us leveraging people, Muslims, who are elected in office who have these positions. What we need to do, and we need to do it also with MSAs. It's something that I've always argued for, that we don't have enough capacity to do. But we absolutely need to support Muslim staffers, having regular meetings with them to talk with them about the issues of concern to us, and to sort of give you our perspectives on these issues.
Well, if I can add to this point, look, I think that the question around what are the concerns people have is a fair one.
Yeah.
And having dialogue and discourse amongst our community is also critically important. But we are seeing a dangerous trend, I think, that folks have presumptions made, and again, this is not a byproduct of what the Muslim community is going through. I think this is a broader issue with body politic. Well, no, I'm not even talking about LGBT. I'm talking about generally how people engage with politics now is very much opinion, less fact, assumption. It's a zero-sum game. And what we're seeing, I want to just bring this back to foreign policy, I promise. We have folks that are now saying things like, we are done with the Democratic Party. Yeah. And I always tell people, I'm a Democrat because I have to be. Mm-hmm. The rules are set as such where I must pick a party to run for office. I know there's a fantasy about third party and independence, and that's cute and all. But the reality is, I just told you, I have a 92% Democratic district. If I decide to run, I'm going to run as a Democrat, and I believe in a lot of the principles around justice, around economic opportunity, around protections for the vulnerable, and investing in things like preserving our planet, right? But beyond that, I'm a Democrat because I have to be. You in the crowd, well, you guys are all, most of you are elected and appointed, so you're either bureaucrats or electeds. But most of our community members do not have to ascribe to a political party. And a lot of it is we bring back some of this mindset where you pick a hizb, as they call it in the Middle East, that is defined by a set of principles. I remember I was at the Mass Convention 3 years ago, and I spoke on a panel, and afterwards this woman came up to me and said, Ibrahim, I'm very worried about the Democratic Party platform. And I said, okay, show me this platform you're talking about. She goes, I don't want to have to accept everything on this platform. I said, well, who told you have to do that? Like, there's not a membership you have to fill out, and you don't have to give bay'ah to the Democratic Party, right? You are simply saying, I will pick the candidates, or I will pick the policy positions that are beneficial and advantageous to our community in that given time. Mm-hmm. The reality is we still have a Republican Party that is veering more and more towards fascism. Mm-hmm. I serve with Republicans. I have worked with Republicans for over 12 years. I'm telling my community very directly, they do not have the best interests of Detroit and Hamtramck at heart. Right. They do not care. But what they are seeing is on a statewide election where Trump won by 10,800 votes in 2016, they could either disenfranchise voters or make them switch parties in the name of appeasing to people's what is perceived to be the moral framework in which we look at the world. It is not a strategic approach for us to do that. Now, should the community, the Muslim community, and I speak as a monolith, and forgive me, but if you could just entertain this for a second, should Muslim communities across the country be strategic and have specific demands and asks around the problems that we face? Absolutely. Could some of that be surrounded around the perceived concerns with what young folks and children are exposed to in the classroom? Absolutely. But I think the broader question we have to ask ourselves is, if you are relying on a school system to teach your kids morality, you have inherently failed your children for raising kids in the United States of America. Because, again, we live in a pluralistic secular society. there will be moments where your children will meet people that are, I'll use an easy one because I don't want people to get nervous in this room. An atheist, an anti-theist, someone who rejects the concept of God. I believe someone that rejects the concept of God is deeply misguided and deeply flawed. 100%. There will be moments in your children's lives where they meet the nicest person in the world. They are the best colleague, classmate, boss, co-worker, neighbor, but this person hates God. Astaghfirullah alayhi. This is someone who says, I reject this idea of a creator. Now, you're going to have an internal struggle. I mean, I struggle with this. Right? My campaign manager, I always tell people, my first campaign manager was a gay atheist Jew. Okay? I was a straight Muslim Arab man running for office. And we somehow found a way to make it work. But when you meet people that you sincerely like and you say, I respect and I admire, it frustrates you when they have lifestyles or perspectives or ideas that you fundamentally disagree with. And I fundamentally disagree with someone who says God does not exist. But I also recognize that I need to accept that at the end of the day, you know, God guides who He wills, and that I have to simply show through my character and through my own personal worship that I am committed to the oneness of God, and I'm committed to the worship of God and following the Prophet, peace be upon him, teachings and practicing the faith. Now, does that mean that everything I do is going to be an Islamic-based decision? No. I don't drive the speed limit because Islam imposes me to drive the speed limit. I honestly drive the speed limit only when I know Waze tells me there's a cop coming. And otherwise, I try to go 10 to 15 over the limit. Now, sorry, I know
we're out of time.
We're running out of time.
We shouldn't share this video either.
Oh, I don't mind that part of it. But I just want to wrap up with this point. We are seeing a global trend right now where fascism is on the rise. And it's not something that is, we are not immune to it here, and we're not immune to it back into the countries that so many of our parents and ancestors came from. So we need to have a serious conversation of how we engage in our local and state politics now is indicative of how we will leverage the politics around foreign policy issues, because we will get duped one way or another. It's not enough to say both parties are bad. It's not enough to say that it doesn't matter who's in charge, it's all going to be drone strikes are still happening and people are still not coming into this country. We need to be a little bit more sophisticated and less reductionist on this take. And I'm so sorry, Saddam, I definitely overextended this conversation.
No, you have the last word.
You have the last word, I apologize.
Well, I'm feeling incredibly optimistic about coming here and listening to folks talking about the value of local and state politics. I'm very pessimistic about our engagement with at the federal level. I've been doing it with colleagues here for the last maybe 6 months to 9 months, and I haven't been really impressed by the reception that we've gotten. Yes, they're doing the White House Iftar, and yes, they're doing, you know, these events, but I just don't feel like we're making much of a difference. Not because we're not trying to. I think you've got some really amazing professionals that are doing this work, but I just don't feel that we're respected. At least
we're not.
Yeah. And so I was really, you know, pleased to hear the AGs talking about the value of state and local, and I'm feeling incredibly optimistic leaving this event to say that that maybe this is where we need to invest our resources is in local and state politics. And then for the federal, we absolutely need to have political power, and our capital is our dean, without a doubt. Our capital is political capital is our dean. Our political capital is also the African American Muslim community, especially the Deadly D. Muhammad community that has a long history here and can really help, you know, sort of help in the direction that we take. And then the third area would be just our collaboration, our working together, to be able to organize, to be able to plan, have a shared vision, shared goals, and a plan that we can all execute on. Without it, I don't think we're going to make much of a difference at the federal level. I think but I'm feeling very hopeful about the local and the state.
This is great. I mean, very hopeful. We started with one problem, we ended with 4. That need to be discussed more thoroughly, but this, I think, helps us set an agenda. In terms of, dealing with atheists, people forget that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, when he led the state of Medina, there were still Kafirs who were part of the citizenry, and they were allowed to worship how they worshipped. They were not told that they had to be Muslim. They were not told that, and Jews were allowed to practice Jewish law, and so on and so forth. And I think we forget that legacy. There's a difference between theology and rights. Yes, we have a theology, and by the way, there's no religion that has solved the LGBTQ issue. Every religion has this problem. Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, whatever. It's the same issue. There's no unanimity on how to address it. And we as Muslims, for some reason, think that we're the exception and we have to have unanimity or we're destroyed or things like that. But there's a difference between theology and rights. In terms of the respect that Maha was talking about, just keep this in mind as well. The President of the United States goes to the Middle East to talk to Islam.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk to American Muslims about Islam.
Yeah.
Right.
That's, in and of itself, a problem we have to resolve by gaining respect.
Yeah.
And going to the White House for the Eids is important. Getting recognition for Ramadan is important. But it is only the first step. It is not engagement.
That is not
It is not policy work.
Yeah.
Getting the rights to people so we end travel ban, so we end the harassment at borders, so we end the watch list. A mayor from New Jersey couldn't go to the White House because they said that he was on some kind of terrorist watch list. These are the goals that we have to put in mind on how we can address it from the state and local level, because that's the leverage we have with these officials to say, well, Mr. AG, can you get the other AGs to sue the federal government for this kind of discrimination? We should be thinking about these issues in moving forward so that we at least demand respect from the government. And we can think of other measures to pursue as well. But I thank you for the time. I know this was the abridged version that we kind of also had to tackle the elephant in the room, but it was well done, and we hope to continue. And again, I want to add to the chorus of how amazing this is to have this network of local and state elected appointed officials working with Muslim organizations. That is part of the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.